Speers. We're coming to you live from Melbourne tonight, and joining me on the panel, CEO and founder of OzHarvest, Ronni Kahn, President of the Australian Medical Association, Omar Khorshid, in Hamilton in Western Victoria, Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Tehan, Shadow Minister for the Environment and Water, Terri Butler, and economist and CEO of the Committee for Economic Development, Melinda Cilento. Great to have you all in the room as well tonight.
Hi. We all love our coffee here in wonderful Melbourne. The story is coffee's about to get really, really expensive. As coffee is a cornerstone of the hospitality industry, will this damage our economic recovery?
Gosh, petrol, now coffee, where will it end? Look, I'm sure for many who can't afford a coffee can be a luxury, a takeaway coffee, but I think Australios indicates there this is also a jobs creator. If people stop buying coffee, this becomes a bigger issue. Melinda, let me come to you first on this. What would happen if coffee hit, as some have suggested, $7 a cup?
Well, look, I have to say that's a crisis here in Melbourne. We all know it. I think it would be pretty serious for all of us, and we'd be thinking about all the things we'd have to substitute so that we could still get our $9 cup of coffee first thing in the morning. So
$9, it's already gone up since I asked the question.
Well, there we go, inflation already. But I think that's the critical thing. We all know it's pretty hard to substitute coffee, so I'm going to be getting rid of a whole bunch of other stuff to make sure that I can afford the heart starter in the morning.
But it is symbolic of what's happening right across the board. How serious is this cost of living pinch right now?
Oh, look, I think for most of you in the audience, anyone who's going shopping on a regular basis has noticed how prices are increasing and what you're being asked to pay for when you go to click pay and hit your card. So it is a really significant issue. There's clearly some prices of goods and things like fuel that we've seen a really significant spike, and what people are trying to figure out is that temporary or is it going to be sustained and flow through? But I think the short...
Is there an answer to that? Is that clear?
Look, I think the short answer is that inflation is going to be higher than what we've seen for a while, and it's going to be higher for longer. So how high, I think, is the question that everyone's, grappling with.
But we need to get used to this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Ronni, what are you noticing at OzHarvest?
Well, the challenge is that vulnerable people get hit first and get hit the hardest. And we're already seeing that. 1 in 6 Australians currently suffer from food insecurity. I mean, that is according to the Food Bank Hunger Report. So that is horrendous. These people are already having to make choices around rent, around shopping, and around medical supplies. Now it's fuel, and it's about choosing what do they give up on. And so this is going to be an enormous crisis, an enormous challenge.
Tehan, let me ask you, in your electorate where you are, what's the biggest cost of living pressure or concern that people raise with you?
The biggest would be around fuel, David. They realise that since the illegal and immoral invasion by Russia of Ukraine, we've seen a big spike in the fuel price, and given the distances that people need to drive, whether it's to get to work, whether it's to take kids to sport on the weekend, that would be the biggest impact that the inflation's having in regional and rural areas.
So what do you hope the budget on Tuesday will do about it?
Look, the budget obviously will look at addressing cost of living issues. We're absolutely aware that's one of the pressures on household budgets. It would also make sure that we can continue to drive a strong economy, continue to provide employment, because obviously having everyone in a job helps to deal with these cost of living pressures. So we'll want to focus on that as well, and a strong economy also enables us to provide the services, whether it be the health services, the education services.
We'll come to that. But just on fuel, you've nominated as the biggest issue in your electorate when it comes to cost of living. Do you want to cut in fuel excise?
Well, look, the budget will be delivered on next Tuesday by the Treasurer.
Thought you might say that.
I'm not going to.
There is another solution, though.
In any way, he's a good friend of mine, and I don't want to ruin that friendship. But look, we're absolutely aware that cost of living is something that we've got to deal with. Obviously, with what we've done over the last 2 years, it's been a key focus. It's why we've provided over $30 billion worth of tax cuts. You know, $10 billion per annum into childcare, driven electricity prices down by 8% over the last 2 years. So
I thought you might say all that as well.
So a focus of the government.
Okay, sorry, Omar, you were just.
I was just going to suggest there's another obvious solution, Dan, to the impact on families of high fuel prices, and that's to break that reliance on fuel. And I guess as an owner of an electric vehicle for the last 4 years, I'm lucky enough to be able to afford one. But I know that is just not available for so many Australians. And, you know, is there going to be anything in the budget that's going to make electric vehicles more accessible to more Australians so that we can break our reliance on these increasingly expensive fossil fuels and, of course, deal with this, it's not impending anymore, is it? It's a right here, right now reality of climate change.
That's a pretty good question, Dan Terri.
It is a good question, and it's one that we do have to deal with. We've got to deal with here and now, and the here and now, especially out in regional and rural Australia, is the majority of people will drive petrol cars or they'll drive diesel cars, so we've got to take that into account. But we've also got to look at what's happening as more and more people do purchase.
But you can change the policy settings, Dan, to increase the take-up of EVs is the point, not to speak for the doctor, but you can change the policy settings to have the take-up of EVs.
Okay,
you've got to
Terri,
admit that they won't ruin the weekend first, though, of course, mate.
Okay, let's just finish the answer there,
Terri,
Minister.
Terri, let's have a deal. I won't interrupt you. Let's not you interrupt me. And I think then we'll have a very good conversation. I'm happy for you to have your turn when it's your turn.
I'm not going to be party to any deal. I'll keep interrupting. Sorry, finish that answer there.
You can keep interrupting, but I just feel finish the response because I think it's a very important question and one I'd like to focus on, because if you come down to Western Victoria and go to Deakin University, their Warrnambool campus, the government has invested in very important research there to us to be able to drive hydrogen. When it comes to buses, when it comes to trucks, because in regional and rural Australia, long-haul transport is absolutely key to how we transition. And the federal government is investing heavily in that so that we can make sure when it comes to buses and trucks, they can be powered on hydrogen. And we've got the workforce to be able to force it. If you look at what we're doing at Portland Aluminium, the biggest user
we're getting a bit away from the electric vehicles question.
We're looking at how we can power that by hydrogen. So.
Okay, we're just getting a little bit away from the question from Omar Khorshid was about subsidies for electric vehicles. Terri Butler, what do you think the government should be doing about either fuel prices or coffee prices? What should they be doing?
Well, look, you can't have a meaningful discussion about cost of living unless you acknowledge that wages have flatlined in this country for far too long. We have to address the fact that wages are languishing. That's absolutely crucial. If you want to talk about costs going up, it seems like everything is going up except people's wages. So we have to address that question.
We'll come to wages a little later, but on these prices, is there anything government can do about these prices?
What you can do about EVs, as has been pointed out, is you can change the policy settings to increase the take-up of them. And we've got policies to do that. The Queensland government has policies to do that. It's happening around the country. Most governments are doing it. This government has a prejudice against electric vehicles for some reason. I don't know why, but they do. And before the last election, they were telling us that we're going to ruin the weekend by promoting them. I mean, this is the sort of nonsense that we have passing for public policy in this country.
David, if we could come back to the cost of living pressure and the question around, we've picked a couple of things. We've talked about price increases. There are definitely some temporary aspects to this, which I think is why we're having conversations around temporary measures in the budget. But I think that whether it's price increases or whether it's interest rate increases, which we're going to see, household budgets are going to be under more pressure than they have been for a while. One of the things that you see always when interest rates increase, when price pressures increase, is the second income earner comes in. So people either look for a job when they haven't as a second income earner in the family, or they look to work more hours. The thing that can't be escaped here is the need to look at childcare again. I know there were measures in the last budget, but particularly for low-income households, childcare is a huge cost. It's going to be something that they're looking at, not just this week, next month, next year. It's got to be something that's looked at.
I'm a 61-year-old woman with a teenage son. I have my own health issues. I don't own a house and I don't have any superannuation. I don't have investments, but I don't have credit cards or debt either. With rising costs of food and rent, I can see my future living in my only asset, which is a 1974 Combi, right? That's my future, full time. And passing my youngest child onto his older siblings to be their responsibility. For the past few months, my family and I have had terrible food insecurity just because the fridge broke, right? Nothing, not major, but the fridge broke down. And we were using ice for weeks. So we have been living on charity food for quite a few months. When my fortnightly disability support pension comes into my account, within about 12 hours, everything is spent on bills. I'll be lucky to have $10 left for a travel card for the week. Today again, Thursday, we went and got another load of food from a charity to support us for the week. I'm not sure I can actually see this cycle that my family is in ending anytime soon. So my question is, why does the government think one-off payments actually help me and others? When is the government going to talk about people like me and raise the rate of the disability support pension so I can live above the poverty line?
Bridget, thank you. And Dan, Tina, we'll come to you in a moment. But Ronni, how familiar is that sort of story?
It's the story that I hear every single day. It's the demographic that we deal with. A one-off payment. During the pandemic, we saw what happened with JobKeeper. During the time that JobKeeper was paid, people could afford or were managing their budgets a little bit better. After March, when those JobKeeper stopped, we had more people coming to us, more demand, and the exact situation reverted. And it's even worse now because of the cost of living. This week, I was going to share a story about a nurse, a single mother, who literally had to make a choice about, she wanted to go to work. She had to make a choice. To go to work, she has to put her child into childcare. In order to put her child into childcare, she then had to make a choice. She couldn't drive her car to work because she couldn't pay for fuel, or she had to buy food. This is the reality in this country, this generous, abundant, extraordinary country.
So Dan, Tehan...
Sorry, but can I just tell you something as well on this point? I think we also have to draw in the issue of not just wages but job insecurity when we talk about cost of living pressures and people facing homelessness. And I say this because during our floods a few weeks ago, we ran a barbecue for people who'd been displaced by the flooding, and a young man told me that he lived in his car. During the floods, the rain bomb that we had, he had nowhere safe to even park it. His car the windows didn't work, he got soaked. But the thing that really stayed with me is the fact that he had a job. He was a delivery driver and he couldn't get enough shifts. And so we have in this country someone who's working in employment and
64% of people who come to us for support have got jobs. They just cannot afford to live on the wages that they are getting.
Let me come back though to Bridget's question, Terri Butler. Bridget's saying, what about the disability support pension? Should that be increased?
Look, I think that the disability support pension has been, frankly, it's been getting more and more difficult to even get the disability support pension. I don't know if that's been your experience, but my office helps people all the time
Should it be increased?
Struggled to get the disability support pension. So let me just say that point, David, because it is important. There's been a deliberate policy by this government to try to shift people off the disability support pension. The former Social Security Minister, Christian Porter, spoke about that at the Press Club some years ago, was very proud of getting people off the disability support pension. But of course, the difficulty with that approach is it's only a good thing to reduce reliance on the disability support pension if you're reducing need.
Okay,
not
but
if you're
Bridget's question is about whether that can be increased. Should it be increased?
And so the question on the amount of money, we have to look at in this country with the cost of living pressures that we're under, all of the different components of cost of living. As I said, incomes is definitely one of them. It's a really important question. Of course, we have to look at that in the context of broader government priorities, broader decision-making in relation to spending, but we have to think about childcare, as Melinda said, power prices, house prices, the lack of social and affordable housing in this country, something that needs to be addressed as well. All of these different items when it comes to cost of living, and of course the prices of food, the disruption of the supply chains and the increased reliance on food banks, charities, etc. We have to look at all of it in a comprehensive way.
Let me come to you, Dan Tehan, on this, because Bridget's other point is a one-off payment isn't by its nature going to fix a long-term permanent problem, is it?
Well, I mean, without knowing Bridget's full circumstances, it's hard to tell that. I don't know how old her son is, etc. But everything that this government has tried to do is to make sure that we've got people through the pandemic, and now to make sure that we've got a strong economy as we come out of this pandemic, so we can continue to make the payments that we need to make to support people who are dealing with these cost of living pressures. And the best thing that we can do is try and get as many people into work as we possibly can, and try to get them as many hours as we possibly can. And the fact that we've got an unemployment rate now at 4%, we've got youth unemployment rate at its lowest level since 1971. The forecast is that that unemployment rate will go to below 4%. That means that there's going to be more and more opportunities there for more and more people to get work, and that means
but not with respect,
so that we can provide
sorry to
the
interrupt,
support.
but I was just going to say, not with respect, not someone like Bridget who's shaking her head here in the studio. The question is about the disability support pension.
David, can I...
Let me just quickly get an answer from you, Dan Tehan. Is there a case, do you think, for increasing it?
Look, it does increase. It gets indexed every year, and we'll continue to do that. But what
I'm talking about a real increase above inflation to help someone like Bridget.
Well, what we want to do is make sure that we can make other payments to assist her. We want to make sure that the opportunities are there for her son to be able to get an apprenticeship, to get the skills and training that he will need, and to make sure that there's employment for him when he leaves schools. That's the best thing that we can do, and that's why we're so focused on a strong economy. That's why coming out of this pandemic, the fact that we've got unemployment now down to 4% is quite remarkable when you think about what we were having forecast when we headed into this pandemic. We've got a situation now where the biggest issue that's raised with me by whether it be farmers or businesses in my electorate is that they need more people to be working more hours. So we're in that situation where we can provide those opportunities for people to be able to improve their wages and to be able to help deal with the cost of living.
I appreciate that point. And we've heard that point. Sorry, Melinda, you just wanted to jump
Just a
in.
couple of things. Firstly, as part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Australia committed to halving the rate of poverty in Australia in 2015 by 2025. We've gone nowhere. It's clear that's because things like income support payments are not sufficient. There has been a huge campaign on raising the rate of these payments, supported by the Business Council of Australia, CEDA, ACOS, the former Prime Minister John Howard, Chris Richardson from Deloitte Access Economics. I mean, the evidence is compelling, and everyone agrees. But we don't get it to happen. And the other point to make, though, is that we talk about the unemployment rate. There are 560,000 people who are unemployed at the moment. There are 930,000 people on JobSeeker, right? So yes, the unemployment rate is low, but there are a whole bunch of people
who are still on that JobSeeker.
Who are still not getting sufficient income.
I think this is a question about what kind of country we want to be. And I just keep going back to the lessons from COVID, and we learned in COVID that we could do things differently. We could, we could even see a Conservative government throw money around like it was free. We could see, we saw that we were willing to take sacrifices in order to look after the health of other people. We all felt pretty safe from COVID, at least I did, but I wanted to make those sacrifices to help the other people, the vulnerable people. And I think, we've seen it with, of course, the increase in job keeper, job seeker. And we just need to go forward. And if you ask Australians, are they willing to forego their tax cut so that we're not seeing somebody who's in employment, they're not a dole bludger, they're in employment, but they're living out of the back of their car. Most Australians are going to say yes to that. They will forego their tax cut and they will be very happy as long as they can trust the government to spend the money, and that's a big question. But if they know that money is going to go into proper supports, into disability support pensions, into JobKeeper, JobSeeker, etc., of course into our health system, into public hospitals, into primary care, these are important things that make us proud to be Australian, because we know that everybody has access to these minimum services.
Hello, panel. My question is, what is the right level of immigration to allow into this country? What is the balance between pursuing economic growth versus controlling cost of living pressures for our current residents?
Melinda.
Well, the first thing I'd say is we haven't had much immigration for the last couple of years, and we still have house prices going up and we still have cost prices going up. So there's a little bit more nuance to this, I think. Look, David, let me tell you a bit about the conversations I'm having with business at the moment. And what we're hearing is that skill shortages are really a real challenge for them.
The business is desperate to bring in more skilled migrants, right?
Yeah, well, what they're talking about is the fact that the investment decisions that they're making are being influenced by whether or not they think they can get the skills they need. And if I give you one example, businesses who accelerated their digitisation during COVID for all the right reasons now want to embed those technologies, they want to be able to leverage those, and they're not being able to access the skills that they need. I'm also talking to large businesses that run global businesses. They're worried that when borders open, that the workers that they have that want to pursue opportunities overseas are actually going to leave faster than they can get people in. So it's a really big issue. We found that in our own members that we surveyed, and we think it's something that really needs to be addressed.
So let's hear from, Terri Butler, you first. Would Labor increase the skilled migration intake?
Yeah, look, I think what's interesting out of the COVID international borders issues has been how much difficulty it's caused. Melinda said that we've still seen all of the inflation, notwithstanding the sharp decrease in immigration, but there's been also some very obvious difficulties arising from the fact that people can't necessarily rely on immigration and short-term skilled migration in the way that they used to be able to, and that's happened throughout the labour market. And so because there's just fewer people coming in with those specific skills that there's shortages for, that's also having a knock-on effect in all sorts of occupations. So I'd say that firstly, I think with respect to the questioner, it's not as simple as a kind of a binary between increasing immigration on the one hand or having less pressure on the other.
Have you worked out what Labor would do?
Look, I think that, obviously I'll defer to Christina and Andrew on this, but from my perspective, as someone who represents a really multicultural community, who represents a community that I think is really open to immigration, and also I might just add a community where there is a lot of student accommodation, and we've really felt the absence of international students on those visas. I think Australians are really open to more immigration. I think they want to see...
Sounds like you would welcome an increase.
Look, what I would welcome is a national debate where we recognise that immigration has different nuances, different consequences and different approaches. And what we should do is get the right settings for Australia. I know you want us to
say yes. Just say yes.
Is immigration
David
is positive?
hates it when I don't give him a simple answer.
All right, okay. Dan Tehan, what about you? Should it be increased, skilled migration?
Well, the first thing, David, is we've got to make sure that we keep investing in apprenticeships, in skills and training to make sure that we've got as many Australians in work as we possibly can. Then what we've got to do is make sure that we target the skilled migration that comes into the country so that it drives employment further. So where there are skills that we need that we will know will expand businesses, create more jobs and more opportunities, that's where we really need to be focusing in on it.
I think we all get that. The question is, should it be increased further from where it is?
Well, at the moment, it's at 160,000. We've got to make sure that we're bringing in the right people with the right skills that's going to lead to us growing the economy, plus doing the investment in the right place. We also have to look at opportunities like we did with the UK Free Trade Agreement that we negotiated, where we were able to, with the United Kingdom, agree that young people would be able to move between Australia and the United Kingdom for 3 years if they're under 35 to either work or study. So there's opportunities like that which will also enhance opportunity for young people in Australia and young people in Britain. So they're the types of opportunities that we want to be looking for as we seek to make sure that we maximise employment here in Australia.
A nuanced answer as well. Let me just ask you, both of our politicians here tonight, about the story we heard today that the government has finally signed the deal with New Zealand to resettle a total of 450 refugees who've been in offshore detention to New Zealand, 150 a year for the next 3 years. Dan Tehan, why didn't this happen 9 years ago?
Well, David, obviously we've got to negotiate these things. We've got to negotiate them in the right way, because the last thing you want to see is that. Well, David, what we've got to do is make sure that you get the arrangements absolutely right, because the last thing we want to see is a return to the boats coming, the deaths at sea that we saw, 1,200 people died. None of us want to see that. And so what we've made sure is that with all the arrangements that we've entered into, whether it was what we entered into with the Obama administration in the US, whether it's what we've done here with New Zealand, is to make sure that those settings are right and it's not going to lead to that illegal people smuggling.
Well, this is the issue, because the Prime Minister repeatedly said he was opposed to this deal with New Zealand, and he said that he didn't flip-flop on this. So what has changed? Has it got anything to do with the fact we're now on the cusp of an election and you're under pressure in those inner city seats from progressive independents?
No, it's got to do with being able to come to an arrangement where we know that it will keep our borders secure, and that's what we've done. It's why we entered into the arrangement that we did with the Obama administration. What we've been able to do is to make sure that we've put a stop to the illegal boat arrivals, and we've done that by making sure that whatever we've done, the arrangements we've entered into, have sent a very clear signal that there is no way that the boat should start again, and that will continue to be the approach that we're taking, because none of us want to see a return to what we saw historically under the previous Labor administration.
Well, Terri Butler, this won't cover all of those still in detention 9 years on. Should the rest of them be released and allowed to come to Australia if they can't go to New Zealand under this deal?
Well, David, before I answer your question, let me say that was utter nonsense from Dan. With respect, it was utter nonsense. In fact, what's happened is that people have lost years of their life because this government refused to accept a deal that has been on the table from New Zealand for years. Peter Dutton has, throughout that entire time, as has Scott Morrison, been making the same sorts of claims that Dan has just made now, that there was some sort of pull factor, that this would start people smuggling if they accepted the New Zealand settlement deal, and that was always nonsense, and it's still nonsense, and I'm surprised even after the humiliating backdown that we've seen today, I'm surprised that Dan would try to run those lines.
So what about the rest that aren't covered by this? Should they be let go?
Well, David, I had... in my electorate, we had the Kangaroo Point APOD, the alternative place of detention, and it was a disgrace. We had people who were stuck in a hotel for months and months and months. And why were they in Australia? Because they had been medevaced here because they were in desperate need of medical treatment. And instead of caring for those people, this government allowed them to sit there and languish in that hotel. It was a disgrace. And I think, David, that most Australians, and I know that my electorate feels this way, would like to see a much more humane and more sensible approach from government when it comes to
release those who
seekers and
can't be
refugees.
resettled. Release those who can't be resettled.
David, if someone's not a national security threat or some sort of safety risk, why not release them into the community? Why not have people in the community where they can be safe, where they can be with friends and supporters and loved ones, and where they can actually participate in our society? It's a no-brainer.
That is all we have time for. Thanks to our panel, Ronni, Kahn, Omar, Khorshid, Dan Tehan, Terri Butler and Melinda Cilento. thanks to those of you here in the audience and at home for sharing your questions. Next week, we're taking the program to Canberra. We'll be live from the ANU's Llewellyn Hall to answer your questions about the all-important budget. I'll be joined by the Shadow Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, Independent's Jackie Lambie and Zali Stegel, and Editor-at-Large at the Australian newspaper, Paul Kelly. And you can join me on Insiders on Sunday morning ahead of the budget. Until then, good night.